Mr. President, our ability to debate and to deliberate without the restraints of time limits is central and unique to the United States Senate. It's supposed to be that way. It's in our DNA. It's one of the many traits intentionally designed to distinguish this body from the House of Representatives and from every other legislative body in the world. It's always been central to the Senate, and it should be. But when that arrangement is abused, we have to do something. Not merely in the name of efficiency, or for the sake of political parties' fortune in the next election. We have to act because when abuses keep us from doing our work, they deter us from working together, and they stop us from working for the American people. And within these four walls, it degrades the relationship that make the Senate run. What's special about the Senate is that this body operates by consensus. It runs on a fuel made of comedy and trust. When abuses happen, or when colleagues act in bad faith, it dilutes and degrades that fuel, and the Senate stalls. There are nearly as many opinions on what to do about the Senate as there are senators. Senators Harkin, Udall of New Mexico, and Merkley have listened to many ideas and have worked to find solutions. I thank them for their time, efforts, and energy. So have Senators Schumer and Alexander. No one has worked harder than they have to find a way out of this crisis, and I admire and appreciate their efforts. Leader McConnell and I have worked alongside all of them and with each other to find common ground. In the spirit of compromise that we're trying to restore to the Senate, this is how we have agreed. As to secret holes, first, we have to get rid of secret holes. Last year, a single senator held up 70 nominations. Why? Some parochial issue in his state that had nothing to do with what we were trying to do here in approving nominations. The standoff finally ended, but only after it became public. What he did was within his right, but it wasn't the right thing to do, and the rule has to be changed. Senators will no longer be able to hide, and the light of day will shine harder on the Senate as a body. I thank Senators Wyden, Grassley, and McCaskill for their leadership on this subject. About nominations, Mr. President. We have to recognize that public servants are not political pawns. An appointment by the President to a federal agency is a great honor. In recent years, has become a sentence to purgatory. The Senate no longer officially performs our constitutional duty of confirming nominees. That leaves important offices without leaders, leaves important duties unfulfilled, and unfairly leaves in limbo well-qualified nominees. The Senate is responsible for confirming about 300 nominees to part-time boards and commissions. Every one of these boards and commissions require the approval of the Senate. Because of that, the vetting process for these boards and commissions takes an inordinate amount of time. They spend as much time the FBI does and the other people do the background checks on these part-time jobs than they do somebody that's going to become an assistant secretary or a judge. And it just eats up time that's unnecessary. There is no reason for senators to keep them from their posts, but that's exactly what happens. And it's not always the fault of the senators. We have to get rid of as many of these nominations as we can. And that's what the Rules Committee leadership has recommended. Senator Schumer, the chairman, Senator Alexander, the ranking member, have come up with something I think is so very important. They're going to help us get rid of about a third of these nominations, not only these to part-time boards and commissions, but others. And this will be, well, the process needs to be changed. So we'll work to cut by about a third the number of executive nominations that require Senate approval. Senator Schumer and Alexander, as I've indicated, are the leaders in this as far as what we've done to this point. But this legislation will be turned over, and they'll be working with Senators Lieberman and Collins, who are the Committee of Jurisdiction at this stage, to develop legislation that will do exactly what I've outlined. Third, we can't afford to waste time for the sake of wasting time. One of the minority's favorite tactics has been to force or threaten to force the clerks to read to read amendments. Now, Madam President, you'll note here I said one of the minority's favorite tactics has been to force or threaten to force the clerks to read amendments. I didn't say One of the Republicans' favorite tactics has been to force or to threaten to force the clerks to read amendments. We've all threatened to do it, and it's wrong, and it's got to stop. That's what we're going to do here later today. This is nothing short of showmanship to have these amendments read, and in this day and age, almost always totally unnecessary. In the 18th and 19th centuries of the United States Senate, senators' offices were this desk. That's all they had. They didn't have offices like we have. Their offices were right here on the Senate floor. So hearing the clerk read aloud a bill probably was more essential then. That's an understatement, because it was part of the debate. Today, that's no longer the case. During the health reform debate 2 Decembers ago, while snow covered Washington and Christmas neared, opponents of the bill worked hard to delay its inevitable passage. On a Saturday toward the end of the debate, the minority forced the nonpartisan Senate clerks to read the entirety of an important amendment to the bill. The reading started just before 8:30 a.m. and lasted until just before 4 p.m. in the afternoon. 7 hours of time during which nobody listened to the reading of the bill. Everyone had already studied it. It had been filed a long time before, and it was after each senator had already decided how he or she would vote anyway. We don't have time for these kind of gratuitous delays. So the third change we'll make is this. If an amendment has already been filed, a senator cannot force its reading. Finally, as to what we call around here, some of this inside politics, motions to proceed and filling the tree. Let me talk a little bit about these two items. I've often expressed my concerns about the procedural hurdle of forcing a preliminary vote simply to determine whether we can have a second vote, determine whether we can debate a bill, the vote called cloture on the motion to proceed. It's another one of the most commonly used tactics deployed simply to frustrate progress and waste time. Last Congress, we had 26 cloture votes on motions to proceed. Most all of them were bills that weren't controversial. We had to hold a vote on whether to hold a vote on whether to debate a bill to promote tourism coming to our country. It's called the Travel Promotion Act. After wasting days of precious time, it passed 90-3. We had to jump through the same hoops before we could vote on extending emergency unemployment benefits, which passed by 87 votes, and before we could vote on letting the FDA regulate tobacco, which passed with 84 votes, and before we could vote on updating our food safety laws for the first time in a century, which passed with 75% of the Senate. Democrats are bothered by how often Republicans have forced procedural votes like those on cloture on the motion to proceed. I know Republicans are equally frustrated with me for filling the amendment tree on occasion. And their argument is, and they're right, it prevents amendments from being offered. So this agreement that Leader McConnell and I have reached is going to clean up a lot of this. Just as I will exercise restraint in using my right as Majority Leader to fill the amendment tree, he and his Republican conference will curtail their habit of filibustering the motion to proceed. Both parties this should be the exception rather than the rule. And starting now, they will be. Senator McConnell and I have prepared a colloquy reflecting our agreement on these provisions, and I ask consent that be entered in the record as if read live.
Without objection.
So let me conclude, Madam President. Again, expressing my appreciation to those parties who have been so heavily involved in this. Udall, Merkley, Harkin, of course, my friend from Tennessee, Lamar Alexander, Chuck Schumer, but especially I want to express my appreciation to the Republican leader. As we have said on this floor lots of times, most all that the American public sees us doing is fighting. We're here arguing on behalf of a senator on our side or a problem we have on our side. But much of the work done in this body is done with Senator McConnell and I, in my office or his office, trying to work through some of these problems. They take a lot of time, and they take our patience and the patience of the entire Senate. And that's why I started here with my remarks this morning, telling everyone I appreciate their understanding that we're trying to work things out. We've been working on this for a long, long time. These changes are important, and I really appreciate my friend the Republican leader for his attitude in all this, recognizing that we have to make some progress here. The changes we'll agree to today are, first, ending secret holds; second, reducing by about 1/3 the number of executive nominations that are subject to Senate delays; third, ending the time-consuming practice of reading aloud amendments that have been publicly available for 3 days; fourth, limiting the use of filibuster as a motion to proceed; and fifth, filling the amendment tree only when necessary. I know some want us to go even further. There are just as many arguments for not going so far. But remember this: we're making these changes in the name of compromise. And this agreement itself was constructed with the same respect for mutual concession. Senator McConnell and I both believe that our reverence for this institution must always be more important than our respective political parties. And as part of this compromise, we've agreed that I won't force a majority vote to fundamentally change the Senate. That is the so-called constitutional option, and he won't in the future. The 5 reforms we're making, however, are very, very significant. They'll move us 5 steps closer to a healthier Senate. In the minds of many, not far enough. In the minds of some, too far. But that's what the Senate's all about. It's about compromise, consensus building. Yes, we want the Senate to move deliberately, but we want it to move. We have to find a balance that encourages us to debate, but also enables us to legislate. We're governed by a delicate mix of rules, rights, and responsibilities in this body. To that mix, we need to add respect. The Senate should function as the founders intended it to function and as the country needs it to function, not simply as slowly as its rules will allow it to function. Thank you, Madam President.